Welcome to the pre-calculus notes for chapter 2.4 titled Complex Numbers. Go ahead and write your first and last name and what period you're in. Today we're going to talk about dividing complex numbers. In the previous lesson we did adding, subtracting, and multiplying. All right, so what we want to do is dividing. We're going to write it as a fraction, so the numerator over the denominator. And then you have to think of the denominator as, like when we have radicals, you can't have a radical in the denominator. So you want to multiply by something called the conjugate. And we talked about the conjugate at the end of yesterday's lesson. It's basically the same binomial except for the opposite sign. Because when we multiply by the conjugate, it gets rid of the imaginary number. Okay? And as long as we end up with our final answer not having imaginary number in the denominator, it's okay to have an imaginary number in the numerator. Okay? The other thing you need to know about fractions is if you multiply the denominator by something, you have to multiply the numerator by the exact same thing because that's like multiplying by 1. Okay? So let's multiply the numerator and the denominator by the conjugate of 3 minus 2i, which is 3 plus 2i, and 3 plus 2i. So in the numerator, all we have to do is distribute. 12 times 3 is 36. 12 times 2i is 24i. And then in the denominator, we're going to FOIL. 3 times 3 is 9. Outside is 3 times 2i, which is 6i. Inside is negative 2i times 3, which is negative 6i. And then last is negative 2i times positive 2i, which is negative 4i squared. These are opposites, so they're going to cancel each other out. The I squared is negative 1, and negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. So we add 9 plus 4, which is 13. That's our denominator. We see if we can simplify the numerator. Sometimes we can, but in this case we can't. So we just leave the numerator as 36 plus 24i over the denominator of 13, and we're done. Okay? All right. For the next one, the denominator is 7 plus I, so the conjugate is 7 minus I, so we need to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by that. So in the numerator we're going to FOIL, and in the denominator we're going to FOIL. So first is 8 times 7, which is 56. Outside is 8 times negative I, which is negative 8i. Inside is negative 7i times 7, which is negative 49i. And last is negative 7i times negative I, which is positive 7i squared. But because I squared is negative 1, when we multiply that by positive 7, we get negative 7. All right, let's simplify that before we do the denominator. So 56 minus 7 is 49. And then combine these two to get negative I minus 4i, which is negative 57i. All right, now let's do the denominator. The first is 7 times 7, which is 49. Outside is 7 times negative I, which is negative 7i. Inside is I times 7, which is positive 7i. And then last is I times negative I, which is negative I squared. I squared is negative 1 times negative 1, which is positive 1. These two are opposites and they cancel. That's by design. And then 49 plus 1 is 50. All right. Here we go. So this is taking the denominator and making it rational. So just like having an imaginary number, you also can't have a radical. So you do the same thing. You would multiply the denominator of 3 plus the square root of 5 by its conjugate, which is 3 minus the square root of 5. So you have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by that. All right, so let's do the numerator first. 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times negative square root of 5 is negative 7 rad 5. Okay? That is not simplifiable. Sometimes you can simplify it, but this one you can't. Okay, so let's do the denominator. We're going to FOIL. First is 3 times 3, which is 9. Outside is 3 times negative rad 3, which is negative 3 rad 5. I think I said rad 3, but it's rad 5. Inside is rad 5 times 3, which is positive 3 rad 5. And then last is square root of 5 times negative square root of 5. So a positive times a negative is a negative. Square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. Okay? So that's where that negative 5 comes from. These are opposites. They will cancel, and we're left with the 9 minus the 5, which is 4. And there's no radicals in the denominator, so we're good. All right, and the last one is has a denominator of 4 minus rad 7, so we multiply by its conjugate, just change the sign, and we have to multiply that by the numerator and the denominator. So let's FOIL the numerator. First is 1 times 4, which is 4. Outside is 1 times the square root of 7, which is just the square root of 7. Inside is the negative square root of 2 times 4, which is negative 4 rad 2. And then the last is this negative square root of 2 times the positive square root of 7, which is negative square root of 14. And you'll notice that none of these are like terms. None of them have perfect square factors, and we can't simplify it in any way. Okay, so usually you can simplify, but in this case you can't at all. So you have to write them all as separate terms and just leave that as your answer. But if you can simplify, go ahead and simplify. Now let's do the denominator. And we're going to FOIL it 4 times. First is 4 times 4, which is 16. Outside is 4 times the square root of 7, which is 4 rad 7. Inside is negative square root of 7 times 4, which is negative 4 square roots of 7. And last is negative square roots of 7 times positive square roots of 7, which is actually negative square root of 49, and the square root of 49 is 7. So that's where that minus 7 comes from. These two are opposites, and they will cancel. That's by design. And then 16 minus 7 is 9. All right.